Hello, and thank you for joining us now for this exciting session that we have ahead. We have a great lineup of speakers actually set up here today, and I'm happy to start with the theme of innovation and how it helps the global health response in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. We have multiple speakers in this exciting panel, and I'd like to start by presenting and introducing a great partner of Unite, an esteemed friend of ours, and of mine particularly, Roland 𝗏𝗏, who will be our moderating for this exciting session. Roland is chairman of the board at the German Health Alliance and senior managing director of the German diagnostic and biotech company 𝗔𝗵𝗄𝗃. He supports improved cooperation between associations, networks, initiatives in the healthcare sector, especially towards multi-sectoral approaches in global health. He is also a member of the World Health Summit Council and member of the advisory board of the UNAIDS Health Innovation Exchange, and also member of the interim steering committee of the Global Health Hub Germany. And I can confirm that he is also an extraordinary person at also a personal level, who I'm very honored to call a friend. Roland, thank you so much for accepting. Thank you to all the speakers. The floor and the stage is now yours. Thank you.
Yeah, dear Ricardo, thank you for this very kind introduction. So, members of parliament, distinguished audience, dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would really like to congratulate and commend Unite Global Parliamentarians Network for organizing this first Unite Global Summit in a really outstanding format and with an absolutely excellent lineup of speakers. And this could not come at a better time. It truly is a privilege to have been so kindly invited by Unite, moderating this session titled "How Can Innovation Aid the Global Response, COVID-19 and Beyond?" And with such, in terms of expertise and knowledge, leading distinguished panelists from the area of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, for the moderator, of course, pleasure joins this privilege. And our expert panelists of this session, whom I would like to cordially welcome in order of presentation today, are Marianne Sarakayahu from Gavi, Maurizio Cisne from Unitaid, Joan Tanguy from the Drug for Neglected Disease Initiative, and Christoph Ben from the Joep Lange Institute. And I will a little bit more in detail present our speakers and panelists today a bit later. I'm chairman of the board of the German Health Alliance, which has one part of its origin an initiative jointly established, quite interesting, by the German government and the Federation of German Industries, BDI, back in 2010. And in GHA, we are bundling competencies of currently 106 member organizations, including private sector, NGOs, science, and academia. So really operating in a multi-sectoral constellation, while being supported by an esteemed political and scientific advisory board, which also consists of members of German parliament, just highlighting Professor Andrew Ullman, chair of the Unite Regional Chapter, Western and Central Europe, as well as Director Generals of German Federal Ministries and scientific capacities, like Professor Ganten, who has just been contributing to the preceding high-level operating statements. So this session will focus on the core topic of innovation under the light, then maybe better say magnifying glass, of the current global pandemic crisis we all have to face. But more than this, also looking beyond. It seems like COVID-19 is currently changing the way how innovations, new solutions, and new paths have to be, and in fact increasingly are being handled by decision makers. There isn't any alternative in jointly developing and putting into effect an unprecedented commitment towards accelerated development and equitable access to safe and affordable diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. It has become absolutely clear that triggering innovation more than ever needs to happen in the heart of policymaking in order to secure that the right framework will lead to the required strategy and the required resource mobilization. So among the core questions which we dealt with by our panelists today are following. So what is the role of each sector, and what is the role of public-private partnerships in triggering innovation required in the COVID-19 response and beyond? And how can policymakers, as gatekeepers and representatives of vulnerable populations, foster favorable environments for innovation and contribute especially to bridging the gap between innovators and implementers as well as investors. And in this context, what are the lessons which under COVID-19 turn out to have been learned from the fight against, for example, HIV/AIDS, from previous crises such as Ebola, the Ebola outbreak 2014 to 2016, but also what are in contrast the lessons we noticed, obviously, but not, or which are now evidenced by COVID-19, maybe as not being yet learned. So what are these lessons? So if we jointly reach in this panel to derive from the presentations and the round of discussion of our panelists, as well as from the audience Q&A, specific recommendations and actionable conclusions for policymakers, our session will undoubtedly contribute towards our shared aims. And this, while consequently following the joint spirit which Ricardo, you as founder and president of Unite have excellently summarized in following statement, which I always like to use: we should see the SDGs as lighthouse, not as burden. So now it's a pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker of this session. This is 𝗦𝗂𝗺𝗃𝗃. She's a managing director of resource mobilization, private sector partnerships and innovative finance at Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance in Switzerland. Since joining Gavi in 2011, 𝗦𝗂𝗺's leadership was instrumental in raising the largest amount of resources ever for Gavi, close to $18 billion US dollars by 2015. She is lead negotiator with G7 and G20 leaders, corporations and high net worth individuals in the expansion of Gavi's investor base. 𝗦𝗂𝗺, I'm very happy. The floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Roland, and thank you really to the organizers and to the Unite Global Summit. Ladies and gentlemen, it's with great pleasure that I'm in front of you today to talk about our experience in innovation and really hear your feedback and your guidance on how we can do so much more. I think, you know, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, was set up really at the beginning of the 21st century, really already as an innovative construct, bringing together a group of partners and the private sector and businesses, you know, encompassing really, you know, the expertise of Global Health Agency, but really the knowledge on the ground of countries, of donors, of implementing countries, research agencies, and also the business acumen of the private sector, so that they do get, in a sense, the incentive to provide the products and the vaccine that were most needed for children in developing countries. I mean, after 20 years, you know, the results have been amazing. So I think it can only be a testimony of the way we can work together to solve an issue. In the area of vaccines, you know, Gavi has, you know, vaccinated more than 840 million children through routine immunization, 1 billion through campaigns, and also saved more than 13 million lives. What's really incredible here is actually to see, you know, the change of mindset that we can see in the partners talking to each other and really finding a common solution. So that process, we have been able, of course, to bring much more sustainability in the system, primarily by being able to get actually, you know, vaccine at an affordable prices for low and middle income countries, and actually have vaccine manufacturers being ready to play this role. And also countries, you know, taking on more and more. It's incredible that at the beginning of this year, as we were launching our replenishment, we could see that, you know, countries now implementing countries contribute as much as donors. So it has been an incredible show of support. Of course, today we are in front of a very unique challenge. And the idea is to be able to bring the lessons of this experience to a new level. And I think that's how Gavi and other partners like WHO, CEPI, and a lot of other countries launched the Accelerator, you know, covering really the whole spectrum of tools that will be needed to tackle these pandemics. So I'll talk more about vaccines, but I know that my colleagues later will talk about the therapeutic and diagnostic. it is clear that we won't be able to go back to our life of before without having a vaccine really to end the pandemic. So the effort here and the innovation has been able to bring various partners together and see how we can really accelerate the development of the vaccine. Typically it takes, 7 years, minimum to develop a vaccine. For the Ebola vaccine, we were able to shorten that period to 3 years, but already starting from a good base. Here, the innovation is really in 18 months to be able to accelerate and put tremendous investment behind the development of vaccines so that we have what we call the speed premium to be able to propose at least 2 billion doses by the end of 2021 to the whole world. And that construct is important, especially when we think about Unite, because it's about bringing the vaccine at the same time to everyone, because unless we are all safe, no one will be safe. So, this the innovation first in the vaccine development, in the speed and acceleration, but also in bringing, of course, new type of financing to be able to allow that access, especially for low and middle income countries. We were fortunate at Gavi to develop what we call the 𝗕𝗏𝗃𝗃 advanced market commitment, which was actually a mechanism that allowed us to front load resources and allow developing countries to have access to a new 𝗕𝗏𝗃𝗃 vaccine at the same time as everyone else in the world. This was a tremendous success, and we were able to roll out the vaccine in 73 countries. It was a pilot, so what we are doing now at a fuller scale is with the COVID-19 AMC being able to bring to basically half of the world population the vaccine. So this is really critical. This is really critical, and this will be, of course, what we want to do with you. One of the key successes for this is obviously the risk appetite, and I know some of you as parliamentarians would be sensitive to this. And one of the balance here in terms of innovation is, of course, being able to take some risks so that we can speed up the development of the vaccine, while of this remaining sustainable. Obviously, we are talking about taxpayers' money and investments, so that we are able indeed to have enough doses for all over the world. So I really want to to leave you with this image that with innovation and really coming together, we can actually. I don't see any problem that cannot be solved, because we are able, in a sense, to bring the Ebola vaccine in record time. We have the opportunity through the COVAX and the vaccine pillar of the Accelerator to be able to offer 2 billion doses for the whole world within 18 months. And we do need your help in thinking it through, but also in thinking as parliamentarians how we do this delicate balance with creating an environment conducive for this type of innovation and risk to take place, while of course, being very mindful of safeguarding investment around the world. So I stop there, and I'd be very keen to talk more about you.
Yeah, Marie-Ange, thank you so much, and already for giving very clear statements towards the core, let's say, core audience of the Unite Global Summit. Absolutely excellent. And I would directly, as we come to the Q&A round for the audience also later, and our panelist round, I would directly hand over to 𝗬𝗏𝗃𝗃. He's Director of External Relations and Communications at Unitaid. As of most of you will know, of course, an international organization that invests into innovations in order to prevent, diagnose, and treat infectious diseases. And Mauricio has spent his career in advocacy, partnership building, resource mobilization, and development. As he is Brazilian, he has joined Unitaid in 2013 after working as a representative in various countries for UNAIDS. Maurizio, I'm very happy that you contribute with your speech. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Roland, and thank you to Ricardo. Obrigado. The work that Unite does, and Unitaid is not just associated with Unite because our organizations may sound alike, but simply because we're here to drive innovation and trying to resolve some crucial world problems. And I don't think that the world has ever been in such a situation before. So this unprecedented case that COVID-19 brought to us requires an unprecedented response. And we all agreed, as Marianne said and you, Roland, said, that we do need to sort of not just come together, we need to invest in the right things at the right time. Unitaid was established about 15 years ago, just as a forum as a funding organization to bring innovation out to countries. It first invested in the new antiretrovirals for HIV, some anti-malarials, and also new tuberculosis drugs. We have since evolved and have adapted to bringing innovation wherever needed. Some of our recent investment, for example, include sort of investments related to oxygen therapy and oxygen accessibility in low resource settings. And this is prior to COVID, so it's just good timing that these things are coming about. So we're a small organization, a portfolio of about 1.4 billion with 50 or so projects around the world, trying to bridge innovators with the need on the ground. And we work very closely with Gavi, with Global Fund, with DNDi, all the partners around here. And to my fellow panelists, just a big thank you for collaborating together in this. And again, Roland, special thanks to you to try to make sense out of a very complicated and complex situation. So I wanted to talk about therapeutics simply because Unitaid, like Gavi, is also directly involved in access to COVID technologies accelerator, the ACT-A. And as part of that, Unitaid, Gavi is co-leading or co-facilitating the vaccines partnership. Unitaid is co-facilitating along with Wellcome the therapeutics element of this work. And I will spend a couple of minutes just explaining what this work is. And maybe, Amish, if you can help me just bring out the second slide on. I have a couple of visual aids. I'm not as articulate as some of our other panelists that can speak through. I will need to have some resources, that one. So this accelerator, the world came together and trying to, push through what we need in terms of dealing with COVID-19 in the fastest, most efficacious, and humane way. So we've got the vaccine spiller, we've got the diagnostic spiller, and you do need treatments as well. And this therapeutics has, some stated needs associated with the work that's done, and it brings together every global health partner working on new medicines. And this has, of course, a cost, and I will spend a little bit of time in telling people about these costs. Right now, we estimate that, we need close to $4 billion in the next 6 months to make sure that the new treatments, and I'll give you a few examples of these new treatments, under the watchful eye of Ricardo and other medical doctors around to correct for any sort of discrepancies. I am just a public health specialist. I've been around the United Nations system for over 25 years now. But we have an ask of about $7 billion with $4 billion needed right now to deliver these drugs to low middle income countries. And part of the reason for this effort is to ensure that those who cannot afford very expensive treatments would be able to afford those treatments as they become available. But before that, we also need to spur or to promote the development of these treatments. The next slide, please. Part of the work of the partnership really revolves around a three-step process. The first is the research and development. We need to be able to discover the new treatments, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's coming through the pipeline. And this discover fast, and some of these things that you can see are the achievements of what we've done so far in the past few months, what this group and the world global community has achieved. So over 1,700 clinical trials have been sort of monitored as part of this, with 25, 30 different types of drugs and molecules being tested. DNDi working very closely with us about to launch a brand new clinical trial out in Africa with some antiretrovirals, but also some drugs to make sure that we have these drugs tested everywhere to make sure that when they're rolled out, they are adapted to people's realities. But what is the point of developing these drugs if they're not ready to be produced? And you've heard through the media recently that a lot of countries, especially the rich countries, are buying in advance or procuring in advance, securing in advance large chunks of vaccine productions and therapeutics productions and diagnostics productions. Part of the work of the 𝗥𝗍 and of the partnerships and of this money that needs to be invested is to secure that no one is left out of this deal. Marie-Ange would certainly say the same thing for the vaccines, and you would hear the same argument around the diagnostics. So we need to continue to invest in clinical research and development needs, but we need to make sure that we have the necessary money to secure the capacity to produce at the right price of the new treatments. Because let's remember, as Marie-Ange said, we absolutely need a vaccine to turn this around. But with a vaccine, we'll still need the treatments and we'll still need the diagnostics. There is no one silver bullet for this. There must be a holistic approach to COVID-19. And of course, there is no point in making sure that this is produced. We need to ensure that this is delivered and delivered to all. And this is the work, for example, at the Global Fund and some of the other partners, especially a lot of domestic financings, need to have been put into place to ensure that when we go through these steps, countries have the necessary resources to make sure that these treatments are distributed. Let me take you through, which is a more technical slide, but I think it's important. So the next slide is going to tell us about a very concrete case that the partnership has identified. And again, I won't belabor any of the technical or medical points of this. For some of you that you may know, I mean, everyone's following a lot of the vaccines. We have some vaccines at different stages, and we do expect some of them, and we keep hearing about, for example, the Russian vaccine and some of the others. The same things are happening also on therapeutics. We have a drug that is actually a repurposed drug that's been around for a long time to fight infection and arthritis, and I'm sure Ricardo has used in his clinical work for many years. And we realized that dexamethasone at the right dosage, both intravenous and also orally, can have a tremendous impact in reduction of mortality of COVID-19. Just last week, the World Health Organization has adopted new guidelines on the use of dexamethasone so that it can be effectively reduced up to about 1/3, so a 33% mortality reduction in severe cases of COVID-19. Now, we don't want anyone to be able to be in a ventilator to be able to use this drug and to be able to be saved, but it is what we have right now compared to a few months ago when we didn't have any effective treatment. Dexamethasone can also be used at cases when people are also using oxygen. The mortality reduces as well. The challenge here is that it's not necessarily a very expensive drug. This is actually a generic drug that people can manufacture without issues of IP. But to be very honest, right now, if countries want to procure very large quantities of dexamethasone, First of all, they're not available because of the dosages that are required, especially in terms of its IV use. And second, the little capacity that is being purchased by the rich countries. There comes the therapeutics partnership, and this is a concrete example of what I was telling you earlier, in putting in the right investments so we can get both the regulatory work done, the guidelines issued by WHO already done, and that we have secured over 4.5 million doses of this for the low and middle income countries for them to be able to have access to through a procurement mechanism done through partners of the Act A. And this is now being rolled out at a very affordable price and with secure procurement lines. And this is the example, a simple one, because this doesn't cost very much, and therefore the access issues in terms of price is less of an issue. And I don't have a slide on this because it becomes very complicated. Just to let you know what's coming through the pipeline. As I said, we need about $4 billion to continue on the R&D and to secure the new drugs that need to be available. And these new treatments are taking the shape of something very complicated that's called the monoclonal antibodies type of treatments, which work out through injections, and they are not very easy to produce. But we've identified a few good candidates that should be working through the pipeline. The problem with monoclonal antibodies is that not only they're difficult to produce, they're actually quite expensive right now. Prices ranging from $1,000 to $5,000 a course of treatment. And when you start multiplying by the number of people affected and infected, you simply get to a tremendously high figure that would mean that low middle income countries will probably not have access to this. So there we are right now making an investment of a few $100 million to secure a price that we hope will be around $50 per treatment as opposed to $1,000 to $5,000. And the other big sort of issue coming through the pipeline in terms of treatment are new antivirals. So you're familiar with antiretrovirals used for HIV and AIDS over the past 20 or so years. And we have tried very hard to repurpose some of these drugs with different rates of success. And we haven't had anything that has come through with a tremendous success, like, for example, even the rates of dexamethasone. So our investment right now in some of the research and development is pointing out that the new antivirals, and we have a few outlined in the pipeline, will probably be coming in the beginning of Q1 2021 that will have a significant impact. Similarly to what I described to you with the monoclonal antibodies, we need to act now to make sure that the IP and regulatory issues are dealt with. The pricing is a very important issue. Antiretrovirals have gone from $15,000 a year to $77 a year per course of treatment, and has taken us 20 years to get to that level of pricing and access. We don't have 20 years. We have a few months, and we need to act now. And this is the kind of work that the partnerships, whether the vaccines, the therapeutics, or not diagnostics, are doing. I wanted to conclude with one final word. I have no other slides, so you don't have to. You can sort of throw back to the face. You don't have to stare at the screen anymore, Amish. I wanted to conclude just with one sort of like concluding remarks in terms of the resources available and needed for this. Right now, the world is estimated to be contracting. Economies are contracting over $7 trillion in 2020 alone. We expect that stimulus packages provided by countries in both 2020 and 2021 will amount to over $15 trillion. The amounts of money are staggering. And yet, we need, in order to not just promote this, these new treatments, vaccines, and diagnostics, a few $billion. The estimated amount right now is about 38 billion, which is such a small fraction of what this is going to cost and will continue to cost economies. In addition to, of course, the human suffering. We have now over 5,000 daily deaths due to COVID-19, And most importantly, we don't know where this is going to land, and we don't know how it's going to evolve. Coming together right now is so important, and we believe very strongly that as long as there is a single case of COVID-19 out there, we're all in danger of this infection. Therefore, treating this around the world with a global access is a priority, and innovation is key for that, and it's through partnerships and through the support of parliamentarians. And thank you again, Ricardo, for driving not just this idea, but you know, the vision and goal of what we need to achieve throughout this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mauricio, for your very clear statements and this wide-angled perspective you have given, you have opened to us. Thanks so much. I would directly like to hand over to Joan Tanguy, External Affairs Director of DNDi. So Joel joined the executive team of DNDi in October 2018 as Director of External Affairs, building on her experience as Under Secretary General at the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, Managing Director at the Gavi Alliance, Executive Director at Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. She has been Senior Vice President and Managing Director at Ambassador Holbrooke's Global Business Coalition and Director at the TB Alliance, and more recently also Director at UN Women. So Joel, thank you so much for being part of this discussion, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roland. It's a pleasure to be with you, distinguished colleagues, and particularly today, I think the ambition for me is to actually discuss specifics of treatment innovation in low and middle income countries. I think maybe to frame this, Mauricio did a very clear picture that says that the issues are discover fast, produce at scale, and deliver to all. And I will focus my comments on the very specific environment for discover fast, but also remind our parliamentarian colleagues that actually innovation is not neutral. The definition of what you aim for is important, and we could find ourselves in a situation where we discover fast something that is not quite suited to the global environment and global health agenda, and particularly the low and middle income countries. So in having planted the context, maybe what would be helpful is for me to start asking a few questions that I'm often asked. And the first one is, why do we need drugs if a vaccine is coming? I think it's been very clear from Marie-Ange's presentation that there's a tremendous effort led by Gavi and its COVAX initiative to actually bring vaccine that are currently on the design agenda to the reality of low and middle income countries. One of the challenges that was highlighted by Jeremy Farrar last weekend in the Observer is that the first vaccines are likely to be only partially effective. So the consensus is clear that both vaccines and therapeutics will be needed, as there's a low probability that a vaccine will be effective enough and its coverage broad enough to eliminate the incidence of new cases. And therefore, the solution to COVID is both vaccines and therapeutic innovation. And when we had a recent meeting with the Accelerator working group to which DNDi belongs, but which is actually led by both Wellcome Trust and Unitaid, the conclusion came that there may be one or two vaccines that will prove to be very safe and effective for specific patient populations, but that there will be issues of scalability, of access, and of deliverability issues that will limit the prompt global use. And I think that's what Mauricio was highlighting. I think we all have in mind this kind of vaccine nationalism that surrounds us, and that we hope all of you will actually combat in your policy-making activities. The second question is often, does one size fit all? Are there unique challenges to certain parts of the world, and in particularly unique challenges in low-income countries? And for that, I would like to really highlight the fact that the overwhelming majority of studies that are taking place worldwide now and have been taking place worldwide since the onset of COVID have been conducted in high-income setting, where critical research questions that are specific to the needs of resource-limited settings are not likely to be answered. So of course, we need this innovation agenda to be vibrant, but we need to also ask ourselves, what are those unique challenges? And what I interviewed the Africa CDC director, Joan Tanguy, and his answer was, one of our most pressing questions is that we have limited intensive care capacities. We have very fragile hospitalization capacity, very few beds per 100,000 people, etc. So with this limited intensive care facilities in Africa, can we actually treat COVID earlier and stop our hospitals from being overwhelmed? But this is interesting because it's actually not a new thought. We've seen the Europe hospital overwhelmed, we've seen American hospital overwhelmed, we've seen Brazilian hospitals overwhelmed recently, and now clearly despite a very strong infrastructure. So for Africa, one of the key questions is indeed, maybe the therapeutics we're looking for is not just therapeutics for advanced care in hospital settings, but actually a therapeutic option that allows early treatment of disease. So for us, and I will say who us is, because I did not introduce the Drugs for Neglected Disease initiative. I'm coming to that. But for us, and hopefully for you, COVID treatments must be designed to be widely accessible, not just in rich countries. They must be affordable, and they must be suited to the specific needs of the people affected and the health system that they serve. And furthermore, the research needs to be less fragmented, and the trials should be well-powered to provide decisive guidance. This is why the Drugs for Neglected Disease initiative took two initiatives. One, to develop a new coalition of scientific researchers around the world with a very strong participation of low and middle income countries, and is the coordinating partner. And if you don't mind, I will make sure that I'm actually sharing my screen here so that you can have a bit of a picture. Let me ask Amish if this is all set. Can you see my picture? Yes. So what we are launching, and you're getting here a preview. It's not yet launched, but it will be launched very soon. Is the largest African COVID-19 study that will focus on testing multiple early treatment options, and indeed that's the answer to the Africa CDC preoccupations. Sorry, I'm trying to make this full screen so you can see better. One of the maybe the points that I should clarify is, why would an organization created 15 years ago on neglect disease called DNDi actually get involved in COVID response when they should be quite a lot of networks worldwide that can respond to what is a global preoccupation as opposed to a neglected one? We can't call COVID a neglected indication. Well, interestingly, the experience that we built over 15 years in developing drugs with a focus on the needs in resource-limited settings, but also developing drugs for non-profit priorities, period, is actually now a expertise that is being sought out in the context of a disengagement of industry from infectious disease. So we've actually been able over 15 years not only to develop 8 new treatments for diseases. I think you may have possibly heard of sleeping sickness, for which we really transformed the care for patients and actually are working now to provide the means to eliminate the disease altogether. But we also have developed a network of 180 partners around the world, public and private partners, that actually working in teams to develop those drugs. So we're not alone. I wanted to highlight that actually we're part of a series of institutions called Product Development Partnerships. DNDi is there along with MMV, IAV, FIND, GARDP. You may hear of FIND as a from from our next speaker. And those are non-profit entities driving the development of drugs, vaccines, and diagnostics to address the pressing need of in resource-limited settings. They're funded by your governments, by philanthropy as well, and they leverage both public and private networks of expertise. So clearly this is interesting because although they were designed to address neglected diseases, every infectious disease crisis, Ebola, COVID, multiple resistance, called on PDP's expertise. And I think this fact highlights the shortcoming of our collective biopharmaceutical innovation system and the key role of those PDPs in this exercise. Which brings me to my recommendation for policymakers. I think COVID-19 offers acute examples of what were already here as chronic problems in the innovation system for global health. So our experience is completely congruent with what we saw in COVID. We came to these 5 conclusions of what you should mobilize for, but interestingly, they are the same issues in COVID as in all other infectious diseases that have been neglected by the innovation ecosystem based on private industry and lacking incentives for taking care of neglected patients. So the first one is, don't make funding decisions a closed door exclusive club. And what we mean by that is that it can't be up to a small group of countries to find and decide on the tests, the vaccines, and the drugs that work. The researchers and public health leaders in low and middle income countries are both the most legitimate and the most likely to identify what works best for their population. The second one is demand open sharing of research knowledge data. I think that's a very important thing, that R&D for the public interest cannot be done behind closed doors. The third one is make health tools free of intellectual property restrictions so that the legal rights to control knowledge do not act as a barrier both to research itself and to the scale up of production that we really need in this particular moment. The fourth one is, of course, ensure efficient production, equitable allocation, and affordable pricing. And for that, the role of Unitaid is really paramount, but also the work of Gavi and other partners in the vaccine area. And I would conclude by saying that probably as parliamentarians, you also have the responsibility to require full transparency on R&D funding. It's kind of a very legitimate question to ensure that the investments of public money in the discovery and development of health technologies to address COVID are properly accounted for. They're actually quite significant, and it's really important that we understand this dynamic between public and private interests, because we know that it's only the convergence of public and private dynamics that will actually provide solutions for the future public interest research and development. So with those recommendations, I want to conclude and maybe end my remarks right now. You can just maybe take off the screen and invite the reflection to focus on how we can best prevent and treat COVID in resource-limited setting by accelerating research, by sharing knowledge and data, by having an open science approach to drug development, and by prioritizing access to affordable tools. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joel, for the excellent remarks and especially for the very crisp, clear recommendation to the policymakers. And now, as you all 3 have spoken about the holistic approach, cooperation, let's add on now with 𝗨𝗏𝗏 to put a focus on the diagnostics and also on the digital transformation. So 𝗨𝗏𝗏 is Director Global Health Diplomacy of the Joep Lange Institute in Switzerland. He has joined the organization as Director for Global Health Diplomacy, and 𝗨𝗏𝗏 shows a career of 15 years at the Global Fund, bringing extensive experience in the field of global health, significant expertise in advocacy and diplomacy. And 𝗨𝗏𝗏's currently Senior Advisor at the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. 𝗨𝗏𝗏, I also thank towards you for joining this panel and for contributing with your speech.
Thanks so much, Roland, for this kind introduction and also for your leadership in moderating this session. And also very special thanks to Ricardo, Amish, Victoria, the whole team at Unite for establishing this unique network of parliamentarians. I think really that was the missing piece, if you like, in our global health efforts, and also for organizing this fantastic conference. So thanks for that. And now, let me try to kind of come in at the end of this session with some remarks about innovation. Obviously, health has always been extremely important for all people around the world, but it has probably never been as high on the political agenda as it has been now, for obvious reasons, because COVID has been challenging basically the fabric of our societies and economies. And we're all kind of looking at how can we address this most effectively. But we also want to look at how can maybe this kind of challenge turn into a catalyst for change and for improvements, and under the slogan that many have used, to build back better. And I think here is exactly where innovation will be the key factor. And in my view, innovation, in many different aspects. We've already talked a lot about innovation in terms of product development. That is absolutely essential. But we also need innovation in financial models, in procurement, supply chain, and very much so also in service delivery, how to implement innovative programs and make them accessible for all people in need. I think this is the big challenge. But before turning to the service delivery level, a few words about diagnostics, because my colleagues have eloquently talked about the aspects of the accelerators on vaccines and therapeutics. And a few words about diagnostics. I know the CEO of 𝗫, 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝗵, spoke yesterday at another session about that. And she also mentioned two figures that have led me to believe that diagnostics actually is still one of the key obstacles also towards universal health coverage. She mentioned, for example, that only 1% of primary care clinics around the world have access to basic diagnostics. And more than 50% of all disease episodes around the world still go undiagnosed. And we do know that, you cannot run any kind of efficient health service without proper diagnosis. It starts with that. And this is generally more a problem of access and financing than availability. But also COVID has demonstrated again why diagnostics are so essential. And both the diagnostics we already have, but for diagnostics, clearly also there's a great need for new products that will help us to overcome this current crisis. Because with the kind of diagnostics starts the surveillance, start the test and treat models. It is important to inform all the policy decisions that politicians have to take around the world. And it is encouraging that we have seen also just over the last couple of months very encouraging developments, including now developments of new, easy-to-use antigen rapid diagnostic tests. I think that is what is urgently required, particularly also in Africa, Latin America, Asia, the countries that are very heavily affected by this pandemic as well. So now what is the kind of opportunity then also through the digital transformation that is ongoing right now? We have an unprecedented opportunity through the use of digital tools, through expanding access to mobile phones, to internet connectivities, basically in all countries around the world. And they have the potential to make all health systems much more effective, efficient, and accessible to all in need. And that really applies to all countries, high-income, middle-income, low-income countries. If I just look at my own country, Germany, for example, I know they are struggling, with the question, how can we transform a paper-based health system into a digitized system? That's not an easy challenge for basically all countries, with a huge potential also in countries like Germany and other high-income countries. But the biggest potential it no doubt will have in low and middle income countries, because it will allow them basically to leapfrog many of the developments and, develop much more effective and efficient health systems that will serve all the people. So just if we look again at COVID and the diagnostics, for example, if we can link rapid diagnostic tests to cell phones and to digital technology that will allow the transmission of test results directly also to the centers of disease control, to the ministries of health, to the decision makers, it will immediately improve enormously the opportunities for surveillance, for decision making at the local and at the national level. But it will also help, for example, to provide easy and fast information to frontline health workers, wherever they are. We have unprecedented opportunities like that. And we've seen also, particularly in the early phase of COVID, how important it has been so that, correct evidence-based information gets to the health workers. And that can be done through the kind of digital systems that are better, developed now. So there's also then a clear link, how we can apply therapeutic options that Mauricio, for example, talked about, even at the kind of primary care level. If we have the right diagnosis, then we can apply the treatment. And even for a distribution of a potential vaccine that we hope will come soon, it will be very important to kind of strategically target those vaccines based on the information we have, who's infected, and which populations need to be prioritized. But when I talk about these kind of opportunities of digital transformation, there are huge opportunities, but we should also be aware that, of course, there are risks. There are lots of questions that still need to be answered. With the creation of all the data through the digitized systems, there is a question of the ownership of data, who manages that, and how do people really own their own health data and are protected from exploitation. And it also leads to the question of equity, so that really this will turn out into an opportunity also for the most disadvantaged, so that we really kind of implement this digital transformation so that we can really say we are not leaving anybody behind, and we are using that as a kind of driving engine towards better healthcare and universal health coverage. I want to conclude by mentioning 3 initiatives that I believe are also particularly relevant for parliamentarians and elected officials around the world, because you're central in many aspects. Joel mentioned, for example, in research and making the resources available and transparent and so on. But obviously, parliamentarians will be absolutely essential in setting the right frameworks for the digital transformation that are required. Every country needs to look at, how do they want to regulate so that, we can make best use of digital transformation, but also avoid any kind of the potential negative consequences. So they will play an absolute essential role. And I think there are 3 aspects that we, together with others, are currently focusing on that might help you in that process. There's a question of the governance and regulatory frameworks. There's a question of how do we communicate the opportunities around digital transformation. And then thirdly, there's the question of future research into digital health and the best use of artificial intelligence in health. On the first one, the regulatory framework, there is the Lancet Financial Times Commission that has been established last year, actually at the World Health Summit in Berlin, that is now kind of looking into these questions and will come out with their report, hopefully next year, to be launched at the UN General Assembly. And I think that will be very, very important information also for parliamentarians and others in the world. But at the same time, a number of organizations and partners have created a new coalition that is called Transform Health, Health for All in the Digital Age. And that is deliberately created also to, work alongside the Lancet FT Commission at the beginning, but then also to make sure that the recommendations coming out of this high-level commission will really be implemented at the country level and in all countries around the world, so that it's not just a report, but that it will translate into policy that will affect, our next steps towards 2030. And this Transform Health coalition that includes, many organizations around the world also addresses particularly young people, because they will be the owners. They're also the digital natives that we need to include, so that all people around the world have the information to make informed choices, but also know about their rights, but also the kind of challenges. So that's something also the Joep Lange Institute is engaged with in setting up, and that, you know, it's open to all kind of interested partners and institutions. And finally, there's also the creation of a new research collaborative on digital health and AI. It is called IDARE, International Digital Health and Artificial Intelligence Research Collaborative. And that has also the aim to kind of bring together all the various kind of research, you know, institutions and initiatives that already exist around the world, but in the form of an international organization that is owned basically by everybody, by different countries, research institutions, and so on, so that we really have a kind of focused and joint approach to this research that has so much potential, but also needs to be a potential that, you know, can be realized in all countries and for all people. So all these kind of three initiatives, I think, might be quite important for our discussion for the future. If you would like to have more information or join any of these institutions, happy to kind of address any questions also through our partners at Unite, because I consider Unite a kind of associated partner in all of this. And we are particularly interested in building this network also with parliamentarians and other policymakers around the world. So thank you very much for this opportunity and for organizing this wonderful conference. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Christoph, thank you so much for in an excellent manner highlighting a different, let's say, focus fields, the importance of diagnostics, then the role and the opportunities of digital transformation, and also highlighting how currently new initiatives and new ways of cooperations are really combining together different activities, initiatives, institutions. So I guess there's a really new dynamic momentum which is being on the way, in which we can and should focus on further developing. So thank you for thank you towards all four speakers for your presentations. And before we go into the audience Q&A, so you can the audience can put the questions in the chat function of the video conference tool. Please always, when you post your question, add your name and your organization. And if you want to direct your question towards a specific speaker of our round, then please also kindly add that. And the Unite team will take your questions, and then we will address that to our speakers. So until taking these questions and directing them to our speakers, there are very few questions from my side to the panelists. I mean, a lot of questions, I must say, on my list have been in an excellent way already been addressed and answered by the four presentations. So you have really looked into most of the important aspects. So, but let me just start with a question towards all of you. So, I mean, you mentioned it in all your presentations, Sama, but if you would summarize what parliamentarians and political leaders can do to enhance innovation-friendly policies, and what is their role in ensuring that the most, and that's important, the most vulnerable receive these innovative tools with dignity? So that goes to all of the four speakers. Who would like to start? Yes, Joel, thank you.
Hi, Roland. I think I started to address this earlier with quite specific recommendations that are worth the attention of parliamentarians, anywhere from intellectual property, from issues of equitable allocation in the context of these nationalistic move, issues of transparency, because open science will drive faster innovation. I think it's the first time we had, for example, a read on the the needs, the specific characteristic of COVID so early, and it has kickstarted innovation. So there's a lot of recommendations there, but maybe to step back a little bit is, I think, the questions that parliaments have to maybe ask first is, we are seeing a mechanism, or let's say an industry who had disengaged from infectious disease re-engage, which is a good development around COVID. We are seeing quite a lot of actors collaborate in providing frameworks and governance to the exercise. But I would actually insist on two aspects: ensuring transparency and ensuring that this is not only a response to high-income countries. And for that, one has to really design both the questions and the institutions in the appropriate way. So highlight transparency and focus on the specific needs of low and middle-income countries. Maybe sometimes the constituencies are not necessarily supportive of that, but I think everybody understands that we are in this crisis together, and that the response to COVID anywhere is the response to COVID everywhere. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joelle. Would any one of the other three speakers like to add? Otherwise, I would also start to ask questions which coming in. Yeah, Christoph, please.
Yeah, thank you, Roland. Maybe just one point. I mentioned, of course, that parliamentarians will be extremely important to kind of provide the right legislation in all countries for this digital transformation. But I think also there will be a job for Unite in particular, because parliamentarians, like everybody else, will need the right information. How can they deal with this? This is such a fast-moving field, if you like. Nobody can really remain on top of that. And we've seen that with many other groups, with civil society, private sector, others. There is this need to constantly keep up with that. And we need to think about a system how parliamentarians, have the right information so that they can then turn that information in the appropriate, national legislation. So maybe that's something also for Unite to look at in the future, how they can provide almost like a service to their members and other parliamentarians around the world.
Yeah, thank you, Christoph. Maurizio.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Roland. That's a very good question, and I agree with both Joelle's and Christoph's comments. I would add one thing. Parliamentarians, have this immediate need to respond to their constituencies and to obvious needs. But we are at a circumstance that this is not a question of just throwing money at the problem. This is not a question of trying to come up with policies that would reserve some sort of capacity to respond to this within your own country. And this is, the crucial role that Ricardo and some of the other MPs that understand more the science behind this, is that if we don't invest now in things that don't necessarily are not responding, this is not about a stimulus package. This is about getting the right vaccines, treatment, diagnostics out there. And these things are not available to be bought just yet. So this is not about simple procurement and simple budgetary issues. This needs to be looking beyond. And as Joelle said, I don't think we've ever faced an issue of humanitarian concern that affects us all in terms of a health emergency that obviously knows no borders. So I think that the recommendation in looking beyond their comfort zone and relying on science and relying on the search for a global response is really my strong recommendation.
Thank you so much, Maurizio. There's another question to the panel. So how can public-private partnerships be an example of shared profit for all relevant stakeholders? Very general questions, but looking now specifically to the PPPs. Who would like to take that question? Yes, Marie-Ange.
Yes, I actually think that there have been models and examples where this is happening. I think clearly in our experience in Gavi, we have seen how actually the model of bringing together, of aggregating the demand has kind of changed the mindset of vaccine manufacturers who probably were thinking more lower volume and higher margin to a much larger market and have a cost spread, over this market. And that's clearly what we have seen in the vaccine that we are buying and that they are producing for Gavi markets. And in a sense that also what's behind the construct of the COVAX facility and AMC, being able to bring this larger market, to see obviously the cost shared and having a more sustainable. So I think that that's feasible. One of the ways we have been able, of course, to do that is having the dialogue with these companies and the private sector. In a sense, having them in has been more beneficial than I think having them out, because to be able to bring the two sides to understand also the two aspects, because on their side also, of course, it's about years of research and development and risk and being able in a sense to amortize this and on our side being able also to have a vaccine and affordability so that it can continue being used. So I think the first thing is really bring them into the tent for this dialogue and this exchange. Here obviously also information is key, and to Christophe's point earlier, I think one of the big experience that we have had, so some, for example, of the initiative that we have had, like the advanced market commitment, is bringing this transparency of information, of understanding the dynamics, which does help bring a better understanding on the costing. So I think the construct per se, the governance, the tools that are put forward and that are being made possible by innovation and technology have played a key role, I can say, in the context of Gavi and in pushing forward some of these more sustainable solutions.
Thank you, Marie-Ange. We are now receiving questions from the audience and also through social media. Prior to going to these questions, last question from my side, given your, in terms of all speakers, your excellent knowledge and view on the innovator side and on the implementer side. So what would you regard as still existing kind of largest gaps in successfully building the bridge from innovators to implementers under the magnifying glass of COVID-19, but of course also beyond? So what is missing in this bridge building? Marie-Ange, please.
Yes, I mean, from my experience, the first thing is that it's again the knowledge and the information, because you have great innovation that are developing, at the speed of light, as Christophe was mentioning, and on the other side, they don't really know where the needs are or what the particular needs are in countries, and at the same time, on the country side, they do have needs, but they don't quite know how to pick these innovators. What's out there, and in a sense that's why also, for example, at Gavi we launched this marketplace Infuse to be able that on one side there's this very stringent investment criteria that we can then offer through a catalog to all our implementing countries, for example, based around some of the key needs, being data and monitoring, being supply chain. So I think, being able to create that marketplace or a place of information sharing and being, to bridge basically the two worlds is critical.
Thank you very much, Marie-Ange. Joël and Christophe. First, I didn't see the order, sorry. So I would say ladies first, Joël, and then Christophe.
Thank you, Roland. It's actually a very good question, because one thinks that there's first innovation and then there is implementation. But actually, the world doesn't work this way. You have to have a vision of what you're innovating for who you're innovating for, what the needs are, in order to actually do successful innovation. And I think one of the bridges that have been very important is, and are not necessarily driving all innovation, but should be, is to actually have a keen understanding of what's the target product that we're looking for. There is no point, if we want to stop COVID with and have a very powerful series of therapeutics, if those series of drugs require intravenous injections and therefore hospitalization of patients. This will actually be completely useless in environments where there are fragile health systems with few beds, few ICUs, and so on. So you inevitably have a situation where if you start with the assumption that you're driving development solely for a country, solely for your country, you will not succeed in actually providing an important contribution to the implementers around the world. And so that's why the notion of target product profile is important, and transparency as well. I think one of the challenges we're seeing with the hundreds of researchers in low and middle income countries that we are in contact daily, both through the coalition and through the anti-COVID clinical trials in preparation, is that there is very little transparency on, or little knowledge on what is really forthcoming in terms of investments, in terms of priority from donors, in terms of, and even the governance of the global institutions have yet to include a very significant participation from low and middle income countries. So I think the governance established today has the merit to exist, is really critical. The institutions that are driving these efforts are essential to the response, but the next step is really bridging further that innovator to implementers bridge through more transparency.
Thank you so much, Joelle. Christoph, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, thank you, Roland. I think, if we are talking about what is the biggest obstacle, we first have to acknowledge, the progress that has been made. In record time, really, we've identified the genome of the virus, and also what we talked in this session, in record time, vaccines, diagnostics, therapeutics have been developed. That is amazing. And we should acknowledge here also the role of the private sector. We have not talked too much about the private sector, but they have been the drivers also of many of these innovations, and also with a promise now, once a vaccine will become available and more therapeutics, more diagnostics, that they will be made available, at production costs, so that they can really be available around the world. But the major obstacle for me is still that I think we are a little bit at risk of losing the sense of global solidarity in here, that we are turning too much inwards, too nationalistic, and we are forgetting what has been mentioned very much from the beginning of the pandemic, that we all in this together, and we cannot overcome COVID unless it will be overcome everywhere. And I think that for me is the obstacle. Look at the kind of financing gap of the Accelerator affecting all the organizations here on the panel. There are still huge gaps, and I think, Mauricio, you mentioned also the amounts of money that are made available for the bailout packages. We need to regain that sense of global solidarity if we really want to implement all the innovations that we basically have and that we are getting.
Yeah, thank you, Christoph.
One quick
Mauricio,
word
please.
to complement what Christoph, Roland, if I may. I think that, we're a very big supporter of the private sector. We're not going to get anywhere without innovation coming from the private sector. But I think we also need to realize that the markets themselves won't fix every problem, right? So we need to ensure, as Joel was saying, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and for whom? And I think that's where the role of international community and the role of international organizations and the role that the PDPs and global funds and Unitaids and the others have to play. So we need to balance the bridging of innovators with the producers and the needs. We need to know what for, whom, and how. And sometimes, in most cases, the market will resolve itself. Sometimes will not, and that's what we need to intervene in the cases for those most vulnerable, lowest resource, highest resource needs, and in the case of a global pandemic. Over.
Thanks so much, Maurice. So now I'm turning to questions, additional question which has come from the audience. So first question, I just read it. A girl at a time. My name is Ali Matu. My question is directed to all speakers. First of all, thank you for your great presentations. Given that COVID has also highlighted risk to violence to women and girls, I would like to know if there are any considerations on the best tools used in recording data around gender-based violence during these testing times. So very, very specific but important question. Yeah, Marie-Ange, please.
Yeah, thank you. No, clearly, I think what we have seen with COVID is of course the risk of resurgence of a lot of and resurgence and increase of a lot of issues, in other health area and in other development sectors. I mean, gender-based violence, but also resurgence of other issues like, in education and so on. So I think what's being done really first is obviously, a strengthening and rebuilding this health system and this system that allow us to monitor and be able to provide the support that is needed. And I know that both Gavi and the Global Fund and the other organization are really putting the emphasis on this restoring phase. It's not that while there's COVID, we only focus on the development of the tools. It's actually also restoring the system, putting in place the monitoring aspects, and actually the monitoring system, so that the base program, including the ones on gender, on women empowerment, can go forward. So this is being rebuilt because, in a sense, during that initial period, basically, there's been a kind of less of the ability of community-based workers and these type of things to go into houses and so on to support. But this is really the parallel emphasis. There's a track of maintain and restore, and there's a track of developing the tools to combat the pandemics.
Thank you very much, Marie-Ange. In order to take as many questions as possible in the little remaining time, I would like to turn to the next one from the audience, which is how can we keep the momentum to make sure that the type of investment and priority given to COVID-19 can be transferred to other infectious diseases that still harm a significant population? It's also directed to all speakers, of course. Christoph, thank you.
Yeah, I think that is almost the key question, right? How can we keep this momentum? Also relating a little bit to my last comment on, how do we maintain this sense of solidarity in the face of COVID? And we don't restrict that to COVID, the pandemic itself, but all the kind of other health issues and development issues, by the way, are quite a bit under threat because of budget effects in both high, middle, and low-income countries. So I think we need this kind of joint effort, and we need then all the kind of bodies that can influence that, from the UN to the G7, the G20, to professional bodies. The private sector can play a role, and civil society activists and advocates can play a role to keep that momentum going, so that we really build back better. And will not just stop there, with containing COVID in certain geographies, but use that as a kind of new catalyst for health and for development, I would say.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christoph. Now, yeah, Mauricio, please.
Very quickly, thank you, Roland. A very good question. I think two points on that, and building on Christoph's. First, we need to we need to put resources, we need to put the money where mouths are. And in case of COVID, as I stated, we're trying to deal with this by stimulus packages that are not necessarily finding the solutions for everyone, and we need to refocus that. You will have seen, and the global community will be presented with a new investment case or a rebuilt investment case that is sort of rekindling through a campaign that's going to last a few months around resourcing for this kind of work. And the second point is, let's remember that in the past, we have learned a lot from the work that we've done on HIV and AIDS and other infectious diseases over the years. And I think this, we see this also with regards to the Ebola response. Our understanding is that the world post-COVID, when it comes to global health, when it comes to dealing with such issues, will be a more prepared world, will be a better world that is learning from the synergies that we're creating right now, and you know, speeding through processes, and we used to take years and years to take now months. Whether it's the development of products, or whether it's the development of the guidelines for the use of the products, or whether it's the deployment of such products for those in need. So our hope is the one that the synergies will continue, and the system is learning to cut through a lot of things, and a lot of administration, and a lot of resource needs to deliver more efficiently. Over.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. So looking to the time, we are allowed, as we have started, I guess 10 minutes later, to have a last round with kind of key statements, key recommendations, about 1 minute per each speaker. And this should be done especially given the really extraordinary audience we have here with the first Unite Global Summit. I guess it's a quite unique chance to really to do this wrap up by such distinguished experts. I mean, you all as speakers, you all have given a great insight already, and you have really touched so many different questions and given a really clear overview of what is needed. But let's try, if you would attempt to pack this into a 1 minute statement towards, especially directed towards the parliamentarians, the politicians, policy makers. So how would you like to shape your, let's say, your recommendations in that crisp manner? So I would, who would like to start? I mean, it's, who would like to start with, let's say, it's always difficult to put it in 1 minute, but let's say if you just would have that 1 minute, how would you summarize it in a crisp way? Yes, Marion, thank you so much for being the first.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I think really what, you know, to policymakers, parliamentarians, I think the first probably a plea would be really to keep that global solidarity and that global perspective into place when it comes to, you know, of course, approving laws or budget that comes through you, because it's really about keeping the balance. We have heard it between the current investment and the things that your governments and organizations have invested over the past 20 years. So not lose this. And we heard a lot about this type of investment that need to be continued, because they are the bedrock of what can be done, especially in terms of infectious disease, while of course, you know, keeping the focus on the pandemics. When it comes to the pandemic, I think it is very important also to keep in mind the balance. You know, we hear a lot about big stimulus packages. They are great, but they're actually focusing on, you know, the symptoms of the pandemics. And some of the solutions that we have discussed with you today are actually about tackling the root causes. And in essence, they are much less expensive over time than you know, doing all these big stimulus packages that in a sense can only be temporary. So I think, at the policy level, I think it's very important to balance the investment, and especially because some of these investments that we are talking about to stop the pandemics in terms of innovation indeed would require you, and that's our other plea, to be bold in terms of taking a chance sometime, but in a sense in accelerating what's needed to bring on board some of these new products that we have been talking, or solutions or services. And it's important to again keep the perspective on tackling the causes and being truly innovative, because we hear sometimes be innovative, but then you do get kind of bogged down into some of the processes that need to happen there. So I think I will stop there. I'm thinking that partnership can work, and actually here is the only way forward. I think we have to make sure that it remains a global partnership all the way through, and that we do take this balanced view, because in a sense it's not one approach on one side and another one that will bring the solution. It's actually really this balance and kind of measured equilibrium that we have to find. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Marie-Ange. Who would like, Joel, please.
Yes, thank you, Roland. I think that the key message is that COVID-19 offers acute examples of chronic problems. There are chronic problems in the innovation system for global health. And this is, I think I'll use a word that was used by Christophe earlier. This is the opportunity to build back better. In other words, this is the opportunity to start thinking of the relationship between public investments and the research and development industry, the biopharmaceutical industry, in an ecosystem, and make that ecosystem working. At the moment, if you think about it, when does the question of public investments in support of industry come? It's usually under the trade and innovation agenda, or the trade and industry rather. But it's actually rarely connects with the question of global health. And it's the opportunity for us to start thinking that the environment in which innovation happens, the ecosystem that links the public and the private institutions into driving innovation, are actually worthy of being both an instrument of trade and industry agenda, but also an instrument of global health. And that the two are not a confrontation, but actually a synergy that has never been made happen. And therefore, my sense is that you have the opportunity to build back better by looking at the convergence of the innovation agenda and the global health agenda.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joel. Now we have two remaining closing statements. Christophe, please.
Thank you, Roland. I would like to use my 1 minute addressing really the parliamentarians. We all know we are living in an increasingly fragmented world, and that was the case already before COVID and might have been, aggravated by COVID. And that has affected politics and, the work of parliamentarians. But I have also learned through my conversations with many parliamentarians around the world over the years that they often said global health is the only thing we can agree upon, also kind of across the aisles, across the parties, across all the divisions we might have. So maybe let's use this opportunity in the parliaments to build kind of global health strategies that bridge the national, priorities and levels to the global, because we can only address health in a global way. And I think there is an opportunity there to kind of, between all the different kind of opinions that might exist, to get agreement on this one thing. And that might then really be the opportunity for building something better out of this unprecedented crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Christophe. Mauricio.
Thank you, Roland. Very hard to add anything. I was also going to say a word to the parliamentarians, but I think Christophe said it all. Let me just say maybe a couple of sentences to summarize this. First of all, this is not going to be resolved in the next couple of months. I hear people in the streets, and I talk to people, and people saying, well, the vaccine is coming, and then, you know, next March and next. We are in this for a few months to come, and the world has changed. At least the worldview that we have now around global preparedness and global pandemics, I mean, the global emergency responses have changed. Second is that we're not going to do this alone. It's not going to be within the borders of Portugal, within the borders of Spain, within the borders of Europe, within the borders of any country that we're going to resolve this. So the issues of global solidarity that sometimes people attach labels to liberal, socialist, whatever, they are completely useless here. There is no way that any country will be safe from this epidemic by working alone and by closing its borders. It's simply impossible. And finally, I really want to, you know, thank Ricardo and thank Unite for bringing parliamentarians around these hard issues, because it is, you know, in addition to Christoph's words, it is, of course, their responsibility. They're public servants. They're there to represent the people. And right now, they feel that they are representing a whole lot more than just their constituencies. We're living extraordinary times, and we need extraordinary people like parliamentarians to help us get through this. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mauricio. Thank you so much to all speakers. I mean, there could not be a better summary and wrap up as a, let's say, the conclusion you have taken now. It really, moderating a session has never been more comfortable due to such excellent, outstanding speakers. So thanks to you, thanks to the audience for your interest. And I would like to especially thank the Unite team. So of course, Ricardo as founder and president, all the chapter chairs of Unite and the members, and of course also in the background, the hard work being done by Victoria, Amish, and the entire team. So thank you towards the Unite network, because you're filling a gap, you're a missing link, which is so powerful, as we now see alone from this global summit, but also, of course, from other activities. And the, let's say, let's be joined in the wish that Unite will further take this role and the responsibility as it is doing now. And we as actors, we really should make use of this form, of this excellent form of interaction and cooperation, which really, thanks to Unite especially, has reached a new dimension at level. Thanks towards all of you, and please stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks. It has been a great pleasure.
Thank you, Roland, and thank you to all the speakers for participating in this important and timely session. We will now take a break and return with a panel session that will focus on drug policy and the need for policymakers to press for reform. I encourage you all who are following us here at the Unite Global Summit to continue tweeting and to continue submitting your questions for our speakers. Please also take advantage of the networking area to meet other participants at the summit. Thank you, and see you again at 11:30 Lisbon and London time. Thank you.